Dennis, having had to face this decision as well, my recollection of your response when the president was making his decision on Syria was that I believe you both felt there was a push, a kind of foreign policy establishment push for force. In the presidency, there's always a bias towards action, do something. Do you see that force taking place now with Syria? The pressure in the wake of this chemical attack, do you see it basically operating in the same way that you saw as a chief of staff? President must do something forceful, got to go.
Well, one thing we don't see right now, John, is what we don't see is the intel, right, where we're sitting. And had we been in the old jobs, we'd have been seeing that. And we've been seeing
had
it over
access
the course
to
of
the
time.
Intelligence, right?
Right, and we'd have been seeing what that was telling us. And one thing that Ken, who obviously worked in Ledge Affairs with Capitol Hill a lot, would have been pushing for, and I know I would have been pushing for, is let's make sure that appropriate leaders on Capitol Hill have access to what we believe has happened. This becomes very critical because if you think back to September 2013, there was a big push to do something. And there was also an initial strong bit of bipartisan support from Capitol Hill for military action. Right. So we decided to test that. And what we learned is when push came to shove, Congress did not want to have to vote on the question. And so I assume that's one of the things that's going through the White House mind now, which is there going to be bipartisan support for military action? Because here's what we know about military action. Is you set out with a great plan, but as President Eisenhower said, plans are worthless, planning is everything.
Right.
And what you need to be doing as chief and what the National Security Council will be doing is preparing a load of options to include what happens when those plans go awry. Because you can't leave the president unprepared for that kind of scenario.
The president talked about a red line with respect to Syria. The President Trump has now come out and said that in the current instance, lots of red lines were crossed. Is there a danger in presidents talking about red lines because it sets up that expectation that action is going to, if somebody crosses a red line, okay, what are you going to do about it? Is President Trump falling into that same trap of saying, well, a red line's been crossed, and now everybody says, well, now we expect action?
I think what President Obama set up in September 2013 was a very credible threat of military force, the outcome of which was, for the first time, the Syrians declared and eventually gave up a vast stockpile of chemical weapons, something they had not even acknowledged they had until then. I think that's a very important outcome. Particularly as we saw this week, the depravity of this president, President Assad, to use those weapons against the most vulnerable people in his country. Imagine if he had this vast arsenal still available to him to use. So that's point one. Point two is, I think the challenge for President Trump at the moment is to make sure that he not only has all the ducks in a row here in this government, as Ken suggested, but also that his partners are ready to go on this. I presume he talked about this with Chancellor Merkel when she was here earlier in the month. I assume that he's working the phones, talking to Prime Minister May and to many others among our colleagues and our allies to make sure that if he's ready to go on something like this, that he has the backing of our allies and he has the participation of our allies.